Okay, everybody, it's good to see you all again. This is another session of the Gospel of Wow, Contemplations on the Meditations of Life, right? And it's my opportunity to try to, I guess, share some things that I've been exploring pretty much my whole life in one way or another, and to try to put words and pictures around these ideas. So I feel like it's more of an exploration as opposed to, I guess, a declaration, because it does feel as if, as the older I get anyway, life does feel to be much more of an exploration as opposed to something very hard and tangible. And what I'm trying to bring is, if you've been on one of these sessions, of course, is an opportunity to explore these wow factors of life in both words and pictures and contemplations. So you will see, as I'll start sharing this time, some images, and I hope all of you can see this, right? This session is titled Love Grows and the Heart Knows, right? So these titles were, the titles, I came up with the titles back in January of this year. So you're looking at, 10 months ago, to sound like something of a 1970s song, honestly, not fully knowing what the sessions would be about. So this one, as you'll see, is about love growing, about growth, and also how it connects to our heart, to our innermost desires. And I guess the core theme of the whole Gospel of Wow series is, how can we make real, how can we realize, right, the preciousness of life, the preciousness of this very moment? And we've explored in the past, there's a variety of ways of doing that. Sometimes there are profound spiritual experiences, or perhaps we just grow in wisdom or age or near-death experiences. There's a lot of ways to kind of realize this. And I'm sure everyone on this call has realized it before. But what we do here specifically is we contemplate these this idea of wow factors of life. So it's a full-hearted contemplation of these wow factors. And the good news is we've all had them before, right? We've had wow factors before. We know what they are, right? That you get kind of blindsided by just something in life that's wow. So that's one way. But, they come and go. The interesting thing that we can do on our own, because a lot of times you can't control that, right? You can't control these wow factors, but we can take a posture, if you will, or an attitude of wow. What does that mean? Well, we have an attitude of wonder, of amazement, of awe. We are much more open, so openness, receptive to just everyday experiences that life brings us, to new ideas, to new experiences. And also we bring a willingness to engage in life, a willingness to see things from different perspectives, willingness to listen to that small voice in our heads and our hearts, and willingness to take action when necessary. So that's what we're talking about, contemplating with wow, these wow factors of life. So this session's wow quote is from Toni Morrison, a great American author. Perhaps you've read some of her works. And here's what she had to say that struck me, and I wanted to share it with you. At some point in life, the world's beauty becomes enough. At some point in life, the world's beauty becomes enough. You don't need to photograph it, paint, or even remember it. It is enough. No record of it needs to be kept. and you don't need someone to share it with or tell it to. When that happens, when that point in life where the world's beauty becomes enough, when that happens, that letting go, you let go because you can. So if you recall from our last session, right, Float On, Sacred Surrender, it's all about letting go. And I think this quote is so pertinent because one, it's true at some point, and I hope we all have been there before, where we just experience the beauty of life. It doesn't always have to be a picturesque scene or something like that, right? It could be an insight. It could be a realization. It could be a memory. It could be almost anything. And we don't have to do anything to capture it in this day and age of Instagram or Facebook or, thousands of pictures. So I want to thank Toni Morrison for that wow quote. Now I want to share a little life experience that is appropriate because it's all about growth. And I call this the time of COVID mushrooms. So when COVID hit, I was fortunate enough to work from home, but my workload did increase, right? It actually increased, but I would find myself taking moments between conference calls and different work items and walking the dogs. And whether these mushrooms had been in my neighborhood before or not, I never really noticed them. But I swear, I think they just started popping up more and more. So these COVID mushrooms became fascinating to me. And they became fascinating for a variety of reasons, but I was truly attracted to them to the point that all these pictures are mine. And I've got literally hundreds more of these pictures. I'm not kidding you. A 30-minute walk would take an hour because I would stop, look at the mushroom, snap a photo of it, doing exactly what Toni Morrison said we didn't need to do, because I was amazed at their colors. You can see here, right? Golden, yellow, orange, red, different shapes. Some would grow up and almost look like they had a face and they'd be looking back at you, and some would be like they were perfectly sculpted. Some would be as old and what looked to be old. Believe me, none of these lasted long. That was another thing that amazed me. One day there's nothing. The next day there's a mushroom. It's crazy. I mean, it's almost like if you stared at it enough, you probably could see it grow. But some would be as fluffy and big as a pancake. Some would be almost like it was created by a 3D printer, perfectly engineered, perfect, symmetrical. Some you can capture right when they're bursting through the ground, pushing through. Some would find little cracks and crevices, and they're leafy and they just do whatever they could to grow. Some would grow in groups, almost like they decided, hey, let's go. They all pop up at the same time. Some would be like something out of a movie scene, like The Hobbit, where they fit into the terrain with the rocks and everything, looks sturdy, like you could touch it or sit on it, literally, a toadstool. And some would be so thin and so fragile that you think a good wind would just blow them over. A lot of them, I noticed, a lot would grow in pairs, almost like a couple. They were born together, they grow together, and within a week, they're gone, right? A lot of mushrooms came as couples. Some, like this one I'm showing here, captured bursting through the leaves in the ground, as red as a cherry tomato. And some would not get above the ground. They would be low to the ground, fitting, kind of nuzzled into the moss, the color of a rock, literally looking like a rock. So these COVID mushrooms, because I just noticed them because of the walking during COVID, just amazed me, right? In the growth and the diversity of shape, color, and sizes. And of course, mushrooms are the fruit of fungi that's living on the ground. and there's a lot of it underground. So that's my story about growth, and it has to do with mushrooms. Now, I want to share, we're going to cover 3 parables. And of course, parables are short stories. Jesus taught in parables all the time. And parables are interesting because they can hit you in different ways. They can impact you in different ways, right? Parables, when done well, work on you as you try to work on the parable. They're not always interpreted, if you will, or their impact is not always the same with everybody and everybody at whatever time in life. Now, these parables are going about growth and giving, right? And this first parable, perhaps you've heard, it's the parable of the mustard seed. Now, the interesting thing about the parables, even though we kind of refer to them like the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the precious pearl, the parable of the hidden treasure, parables are not about one thing. As we read through these stories, parables are really dynamic, interactive, where multiple things are moving and interacting together. Parables really are almost like a process. There's a movement to it, as you'll see. So here it says, this is from the Gospel of Matthew, the kingdom of heaven. So, and by the way, Jesus wasn't talking about heaven, afterlife. He was talking about something available immediately. That was his good news. It's here, it's now. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in the field. So notice that it's a seed, not just a seed, but it's a seed that was sown in a field. And then he emphasizes it's the smallest of all seeds. And that's important. Then it goes on. When it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants, and it becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. So it's not the mustard seed. It's not the person who's sown it. It's not the ground. It's not the air, the water. It's not growing into a tree. It's not just the birds that make a home in the tree. It's all of that, the whole thing, right? It's a whole process. So that's the first parable. Now, the next parable is not from Christian scripture. It's actually a parable from a children's author, and it's one of my favorites, right? And it's going to be a bit longer, but I think it will be of interest. It's very applicable here. And I'm going to ask us to, and I'm going to lead us into a contemplative listening of this particular parable, or let's just call it a story. But I think it does have the qualities of a good parable. And the person, Shel Silverstein, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but I loved his books. He would write silly limericks and poems, and he'd write children's books, and he would sing songs. And I think I enjoyed them as much as the boys. This particular one was his book, perhaps his most well-known book, called The Giving Tree. It was written in 1964, 1 year before I was born. And I've read this many, many times, The Giving Tree. So if you will, how to listen to something contemplatively, it's actually easier than any other kind of listening. You just allow the images and the words to flow over you. And you don't try to analyze it. And it's like listening to music where whatever happens when you hear it, whatever emotions, whatever sensations come up, you just allow them all to come, arise, and move on. You don't try to grab hold of anything. And one way to make it a bit more easier, if you will, is kind of soften your gaze, right? So you're not really staring too hard. It's kind of a relaxation. take a few deep breaths. And we spend so much time in our mind, in our thinking mind, our head. Imagine that you can allow your mind to expand out into the room, right? So that you're taking everything in, that there's not a hard inside and outside. You're just open, you're receptive, you're relaxed. And here is the given tree. Once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy. And every day the boy would come and he would gather her leaves and make them into crowns and play king of the forest. He would climb up her trunk and swing from her branches and eat apples. And they would play hide and go seek. And when he was tired, he would sleep in her shade. And the boy loved the tree very much. And the tree was happy. But time went by. And the boy grew older. And the tree was often alone. Then one day the boy came to the tree, and the tree said, "Come, boy, come and climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and eat apples and play in my shade and be happy." "I'm too big to climb and play," said the boy. "I want to buy things and have fun. I want some money. Can you give me some money?" "I'm sorry," said the tree, "but I have no money. I have only leaves and apples. Take my apples, boy, and sell them in the city. Then you will have money and you will be happy." And so the boy climbed up the tree and gathered her apples and carried them away. The tree was happy. But the boy stayed away for a long time, and the tree was sad. And then one day the boy came back, and the tree shook with joy, and she said, "Come, boy, climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and be happy." "I'm too busy to climb trees," said the boy. "I want a house to keep me warm," he said. "I want a wife and I want children, and so I need a house. Can you give me a house?" "I have no house," said the tree. "The forest is my house, and you may cut my branches and build a house. Then you will be happy." And so the boy cut off her branches and carried them away to build his house. And the tree was happy. But the boy stayed away for a long time, and when he came back, the tree was so happy she could hardly speak. "Come, boy," she whispered, "come and play." "I'm too old and sad to play," said the boy. "I want a boat that will take me far away from here. Can you give me a boat?" "Cut down my trunk and make a boat," said the tree. "Then you can sail away and be happy." And so the boy cut down her trunk and made a boat and sailed away. And the tree was happy, but not really. And after a long time, the boy came back again. "I am sorry, boy," said the tree, "but I have nothing left to give you. My apples are gone." "My teeth are too weak for apples," said the boy. My branches are gone, said the tree. You cannot swing on them. I am too old to swing on branches, said the boy. My trunk is gone, said the tree. You cannot climb. I am too tired to climb, said the boy. I am sorry, sighed the tree. I wish that I could give you something, but I have nothing left to give. I'm just an old stump. I am sorry. I don't need very much now, said the boy. Just a quiet place to sit and rest. I am very tired. Well, said the tree, straightening herself out as much as she could. Well, an old stump is good for sitting and resting. Come, boy, sit down and rest. And the boy did. And the tree was happy. The end. So, why am I reading this story to you, right? The title of the session is Love Grows. And this word love, obviously, we're all very familiar with it, and we know it. It's a huge part of our life, our culture. But what exactly is it? What is it? Not only what is it, but is it something that's just unique to humans? Is it something that's been around since the creation of the universe? Right? And if so, do we recognize it? Now, I'm not going to obviously answer all of this question because it's too big and I don't honestly know the answer. But I do want to propose something that can help us think about this. And the reason is because if you remember from the story, the given tree, it says, and she loved the little boy, and the boy loved the tree. So there was this huge component of love in the story. Now, C.S. Lewis, who is one of the greatest Christian thinkers and writers of the 20th century, and of course, if you're not familiar with him, fiction and nonfiction, the Chronicles of Narnia is what most popular, but also his writings as nonfiction. One of his books was the book called The Four Loves, and he highlights the different types of love. And they're based on what the Greeks had already highlighted, the different types of love. And these are loves we all experience, hopefully, throughout our lives. One is just the simple, affectionate love that we can have for people, things, just something that just makes you smile. Another, of course, is romantic love, the thing that makes up romantic comedies, right? Romance novels. Eros would be the Greek word for romantic love. Friendship love, the love of friends. And this could span to pets and trees and plants, anything you would consider a friend, right? And then the fourth love, and the one that I want to take a bit more time to explore, is divine love. It's how C.S. Lewis described it, divine love. The Greek word is agape. And we all can look at the word love, and we all can recognize that these four loves, and there could be more, I'm sure there probably are, but they are different. They have different quality. But agape, definition of it would be a selfless love, something beyond ourself that is committed to the well-being of others, or we could say the well-being of all things, right? That's agape. That's why they refer to it as divine. The Greeks would refer to it as divine love because the feeling would be only something divine can actually love like this selfless love. So if love is something that's in the fabric of the universe, then we should be able to see it. If it doesn't require human beings to come up with this concept, then it should be there the whole time in some form or fashion. So What would love look like 4.5 billion years ago when this planet, we estimate, was created? So 4.5 billion years ago, the planet was basically a big ball of fire, molten lava, an atmosphere that could not sustain any type of life. It would be poisonous, right? It would be something that someone would look at and like, wow, I wonder what's going to happen with that thing. Looks pretty rough, right? And yet we know that over time, it has turned into this blue and green and brown and white jewel of a planet that sustains all the life and everything we know and love. How did that happen, right? What took it from a planet of molten lava lakes to something that is sustainable, something that grows? All right, so let's fast forward from 4.5 billion years ago to 460 million years ago. So still a long time, way before anything we would call mammals or humans were around. The planet's cooled, and cellular life forms have been started, and this plants began. And they were always around water sources back then because they did not have roots, right? They were like moss or these little leafy plants clinging onto rocks or floating, right? That's what they first started with. And you think, okay, that's good. But over time, they evolved, right? They evolved, they moved away from water sources because they evolved to grow roots. They literally grew roots into the ground, and they grew up out of the ground, reaching up to the light, to the atmosphere. It's the move from the non-vascular plant life to vascular plant life. And the beauty of that is that plants, as you know, probably, they capture carbon dioxide, which the atmosphere was full of carbon dioxide by then. It was a much, much warmer planet back then. They captured carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, removed it from the atmosphere, and then they would release the oxygen into the atmosphere. So what this allowed over time is the quantity of oxygen in the atmosphere increased. The quantity of carbon dioxide decreased. And that decreased because carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It's like putting on sweater over sweater over sweater. It actually allowed the planet to cool and the atmosphere to evolve and change to have more oxygen. Everything we know about life, we could thank plants, right? Because they created that. They breathe out oxygen. But as they were changing above ground in the atmosphere, they also were changing below ground. The root system would reach down into the ground, breaking up the rocks, breaking up the frozen lava, moving carbon from in the atmosphere into their own bodies. By the way, what gives plants growth is not what they pull up from the soil. It is the carbon they remove from the atmosphere, breaking up the rocks, putting oxygen, carbon, other things in the ground, capturing carbon even more so. So they're creating the atmosphere and they're creating the soil in which we depend on. And then when plants, the process of life and death, when the plants, the trees, everything would die, of course, they decompose, further creating more soil that we know, creating the planet that we know, making a hospitable place to live. So how did we go from this molten lava of a planet to the planet that we know? Well, we can thank trees. We can thank plants. We can thank everything we look and see and touch for creating both the soil that grows all of our food, as well as the atmosphere that we depend on. So we read the book, The Giving Tree, but we should think about trees as the giving trees. or plants in general, but we'll just kind of focus on trees because they created the atmosphere, right? They continue to purify our air. They capture carbon, removing it from the atmosphere. They provide houses to millions of species, and a lot of those are critical for maintaining and keeping diseases from spreading. So just like the mustard seed, right? And they cool the planet, we've mentioned that, but also just from the shade as well, and whether it be the cities or streets or houses, they act as a cooling agent. They protect us against floods and water pollution because they do take toxins out of water, protect us against flood. You clear cut or you have a forest fire and then you have heavy rains, you get mudslides, you get erosion. And it's been proven multiple times, if you have issues with anxiety, with stress, getting outside into nature relaxes and eases us. So the giving trees. So is that a form of love? I would say yes, right? The creation of this planet is a form of love. But trees, one thing we've learned in the last 3 to 4 decades, so really relatively recently, is there is an intelligence to forests and trees. So it's not just that they do all this stuff to help us with our atmosphere. There's something more going on. And I just want to give credit to some of the leaders in this industry, Dr. Suzanne Simard, Peter Wolleben, Teresa Ryan, who are really been discovering through their own intuitions, but proven through scientific experiment, that trees and forests are intelligent. They do things that we would have never predicted that they could do. And get this, even though mushrooms are a totally different kingdom from trees, they play a key role, which I thought was kind of cool because of my affection for mushrooms. So what is that role? Mycorrhizal networks. Right? Mycorrhizal networks. You may not have heard of that root. It literally means fungus and roots put together. But these are networks under the ground. And they are, we all are familiar with roots, but the fine filaments of fungi merge with roots. And they connect the plants together. The roots can mingle, but this fungi plays a critical part of the plant. So you've got this massive amount, as Dr. Simard would say, she was sitting right there, thousands of miles of these mycorrhizal networks under your feet, wherever you happen to be. And they jokingly refer to it as the wood wide web because of this interconnectivity of all these plants. Now, what does it allow plants to do? Why is this important? Why is this such a big deal? Well, I just finished a book that I recommend if you like these type of books. It is a novel. It's called The Overstory, but the whole story is based on, it has characters like a regular novel. It has a plot and everything. But trees play a huge role in these stories. And a lot of the findings from the doctors I just mentioned are covered in detail in this story. And some of the things I pulled from the story, because I really did want to share some of the insights from the story, are these. We found that trees could communicate over the air and through their roots. We found that trees take care of each other. Outsiders, we scientists, discovered that trees sense the presence of other nearby life. That trees learns to save water, that a tree learns to save water, that trees feed their young and synchronize their mass. That just means they learn to drop seeds all at the same time so that animals, even if animals overeat their nuts and acorns, if they synchronize it, drop all their seeds at the same time, the animals will eat as much as they can, they'll move on, allowing a lot of their nuts to still germinate, grow. They bank resources. They warn kin. They actually send warning signals to their kin. They send out signals to wasps to come and save them from attacks, right? And they do so much more than that. A forest, the book said, a forest knows things. They wire themselves up underground. There are brains down there underground. Ones that our own brains aren't shaped to see, because we just think about life in a certain way. It's got to be like us. It's got to be like self-aware. We just don't appreciate what's going on. And then the last quote from the book: link enough trees together and a forest grows aware. And it's amazing, in the filaments of the fungi, right? The mycorrhizal networks that's built plays an essential role. And the mushrooms get something out of it too. They get the carbohydrates, the sugars from the trees, but they're moving. They're like the neural network, so trees can communicate. And I won't go into more detail on that, but I just want to encourage you to, if you haven't, went out and read our article or two, you should. It's quite amazing. We're surrounded by life, and it's much more intelligent than we could ever imagine. And we need to think about that, because I did want to bring up deforestation, right? Every second, a forest the size of a football field is cut down. Every year, a collection of forests the size of Switzerland. And we do replant. Old growth forests, the diverse ecosystems are much more valuable than just monocrop cultures, right? But whether it be in Brazil or British Columbia or anywhere, there's a lot of deforestation going on. And to the point, I don't think we fully appreciate what we could be doing. In addition to deforestation, as we know, even since 1980s, right, forest fires have increased for a lot of different reasons. And that too is taking out more forests, putting more carbon up in the air. That's a concern. The impact, part of the impact of this is that we are seeing extinction rates, and there's different ways to measure it. And extinction is something that's happened throughout the history of the planet, but it's happening about 1,000 times faster than normal. And this is not just these cool creatures I'm showing here. I mean, it's also massive impact to insects, to plant life, to different types of trees. So there is an impact to what's going on. And the question I think we will need to answer is why, right? I'm not here to try to make anybody feel guilty. I don't necessarily know the answer. I'm just here to highlight something. But why? And to try to get to the core of that particular question, that answer, I want to introduce a song, right? And these sessions always share some lyrics from songs that were important to me when I was growing up. And this particular one is from a young Bruce Springsteen on his album, The River. And this was his first radio hit, even though he'd been around about a decade before then. Perhaps you remember. It's called Hungry Heart. And it goes like this. Got a wife and kids in Baltimore, Jack. I went out for a ride and I never went back. Like a river that don't know where it's flowing, I took a wrong turn and I just kept going. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Everybody's got a hungry heart. Lay down your money and you play your part. Everybody's got a hungry heart. And of course, as a teenager, this was just an unrequited love song, like so many that were on the radio. But what Bruce was touching on is this desire, this burning desire, this hungry heart that seems to drive us in ways like a river that doesn't know where it's flowing, right? You take the wrong turn, you keep going. there's something about it feels about being human, where we have this hungry heart, this need for more. And Bruce did not discover this. This has been known for a while. This is not a modern issue, even though I think there's some things in modernity that makes it worse. If you go back 2,500 years ago, here's a picture of the Buddha in this idea called hungry ghosts, right? This is pretty popular in Buddhism. Hungry ghosts represents the part of being human that can never get fulfilled, right? And they were always represented as having distended bellies and just looking like the worst caricature of junkie, really. And they do represent what can make us addicted to stuff, right? That this never being satisfied with what we've got, this hungry ghost. So it is part of being human, as pointed out in the teachings of the Buddha, but not only in the teachings of the Buddha, in Christian scripture, there's the temptations of Jesus, where he has his experience. He gets baptized. He is driven into the desert to figure out what's going on. He said Spirit drove him to the desert, 40 days, 40 nights. And then he has his temptations from Satan, from the devil, of what to do with this newfound insight, this newfound learning, this new power, if you will, this new recognition, what to do with it. Turn stones into bread, jump from the temple, and prove that you're holy, son of God, or just pretty much be the boss of everything, right? Run the nations of the world. All of these are temptations in their own way, of a hungry heart. And he says no before he takes on this teaching. He's like, no to all of them, right? We can't live on bread alone. We can't live on stuff alone. And then in the Hebrew scripture, there's the story of Cain and Abel, right? Where they both do their sacrifice. And for whatever reason, God prefers Abel's to Cain's. And of course, if you know the story, right, Cain slays Abel and buries him in the field. And it says straight in Genesis, right, the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And Cain says, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" So part of this hungry heart has a jealousy component to it. Are we our brother's keepers, right? And we should extend that beyond just fellow human beings. We really do. We have had such an impact on the planet. We've got to extend it beyond. One way to show the impact and to show how we're filling our hungry hearts is not for me just to talk about it, for us to talk about all the different things, but to look at the result, right? These are images of our waste, plastics everywhere. That's just one thing, right? And this is multiplied everywhere. That the stuff goes somewhere. I know there is some recycling, but a lot of it is not. This is a real issue, as you can see here. And it has a real impact on nature, right? Other than just looking disgusting. Right. This is a seagull. My son once spent some time in South Africa, several months, half a year or so. But one of his jobs there was to walk on the seashore outside of Cape Town and to pick up every piece of plastic and then document it, right? Actually write it down, and they would go back and kind of, where did this come from? Plastic travels everywhere. And often it is eaten by wildlife, as you can see here. It never stops. And I would say plastic and waste are just an example, even in this situation, right? It killed a whale of our focus on growth through consumption, or growth through accumulation, or growth through more and more without thinking about it, without really realizing the impact, as long as it's out of sight, out of mind. So the question that was part of today's session about love grows, there was a question, right? Can we recognize the rhythm of growth? Can there be a healthier way for us to grow as opposed to what appears to be growth through consumption? And I was struggling with this. I was really struggling with this about a month ago when I was thinking about, well, what are we going to talk about this session? And a friend of mine sent me an email that was the perfect email at the perfect time. She sent me an email, and it was one particular blog from Maria Popova, who does the Marginalian blog. And Maria, she has a very organic, I would say, spiritual, subtle, nuanced way of living life and sharing it. And this particular blog was on growth itself. So exactly what I was struggling with, like what can we talk about here? And she said in her blog, she says, I have been thinking a great deal about growth, what it means, what it asks of us, how it feels when unforced but organic. Right? How does growth feel when it is happening on its own? Our minds, we can't see growth unless we can measure it and we think it's actually happening and we thinking we're controlling it, right? We want to see progress. She's like, this deeper underground growth is what she's asking about. Then she says, we don't always know what needs to be shed, what needs to be let go. We don't always know that. Or we don't always know what the optimal direction of growth is. That's humbling as a Homo sapien, as a human, right? We want to know exactly what's the next thing we need to do. Then she said this is where the blind optimism of a tree is helpful. That curveball just hit me right in the heart. The blind optimism of a tree is helpful. And she said, there is consolation, there is relief. There's consolation in trusting the quiet workings of chemistry and the primal instinct for oriented to the light. So this workings of chemistry, right? The process of growth, the process of life itself, trusting it in the instinct for orienting toward the light, toward the good, toward the beautiful, toward the true. There's a consolation, because then it's not all about you trying to figure it out. So what is the blind optimism of a tree? Right? I wanted to think about it. You could kind of get an idea of it, but I wanted to make it real for us. The blind optimism of a tree. So, found a story of a tree. This is a tree, cross section of a tree, so you can see all the rings, right? We all know that's how you count the years of a tree. We learned that as a kid. This is a loblolly pine that was born in 1920, right there in the middle, the very first sapling in the middle of the tree. And this is its story and how it lived with its blind optimism. Then up from 1920 to 25, 5 good years, grew rapidly because you could tell by the rings and the size, no disturbances, everything's fine. But then in 1930, so 10 years old, something is pushing against this tree. And they can tell, you can look and see that something is pushing it over because it's growing more wood on one side to support itself. So it's trying to stay upright. So it's taking action. It's taking action, growing wood on one side to hold itself up. And it does that for quite a few years, 10 years actually, because in 1940, it starts growing straight again. So somehow that pressure relieved itself, I guess. But we could tell that the neighbors around it are growing because the rings are not that big, right? But it's growing straight, growing with other trees. Then in 43, the other trees are harvested. And we can kind of tell that because the rings become big again. It's taken up more resources. It can grow faster. Then in 46, so the tree's 26 years old, a forest fire comes through. And you can see the actual scar of the fire in the rings. It remains as a memory, as a scar, just like we would have a scar. But it grows through that. It does not die. 48, there's a prolonged dry spell. So for many years, the tree's barely growing, perhaps sharing resources or receiving resources from other trees. We know that now. Then in 1973, insects eat the leaves. I don't know how they could tell. That's why there wasn't much growth, but they kind of know. Insects eat the leaves. Then it grows another decade or so and it's cut down. That is the story of a tree. Now, just like if we were told at the beginning, we can actually comprehend, here's all the challenges you're going to have throughout your life, you probably run screaming, right? We have lived our life, even though we may not acknowledge it, with a large component of thinking we're doing everything and controlling everything, but a large component of blind optimism. And I think that's what Maria Popova was referring to. All right, we're going to end with another parable. And I think it's also an example of blind optimism, of faith, right? Of faith, of trusting. And this is my favorite parable. So I would like for us to, for it to be part of a contemplative reading. So we'll, again, relax. And you can close your eyes this time if you wish. Sit and take 2 or 3 deep breaths. Now allow your attention, your awareness to just feel the sensations of being in your body. So all at once, just feel all the different sensations of a body. Feel the energy, the tingling, perhaps the aches and pains, the temperature. Soften your face. Soften your jaw, your shoulders. Relax your forehead. And create a space. And by doing that, I just simply mean allow your mind, what feels to be located in the head, just to expand to include all the sensations in the room, all the sensations in your body. Almost as if your awareness could fill up the entire room. And know that everything, all these experiences are occurring in your consciousness, in your mind, in your awareness, including the sound of my voice. The reading of these parables. So sit open and receptive. And as Toni Morrison said, simply letting it go. The parable is from the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus said, the kingdom of God is as if a man should scatter seed on the ground. He then sleeps and rises night and day, night and day. And the seed sprouts and grows. He knows not how. He knows not how. The earth produces by itself. First the blade, then the ear, and then the full grain. And when the grain is ripe, at once he puts in the sickle because the harvest has come. The entire process of growth of your life, of the lives of all you have cared for and who have cared for you, is precious. We can let go of waiting, of anticipating, of trying to change our state of mind, of grasping, of looking forward to another time. This is it. This moment is full and abundant on its own. So sit and be with the blind optimism of a tree. having faith that what needs to be done is being done. Relax and let go. And when we get captured by a thought or an emotion, that too is nothing more than another sensation, another experience. And it's not a problem. Just let go. For our final few minutes together, I'll share another quote from the Overstory. This is not our world with trees in it. It's a world of trees where humans have just arrived. Let's sit in appreciation for the giving trees in our own lives. On your next inhalation, please breathe in a bit deeper, filling your lungs and releasing, exhaling, opening your eyes. And welcome back. And I want to thank you for your presence and your time today.